Hello and welcome to Niche Snacks. Today we're going to be talking about a deck that I didn't actually make. This is one of my friend's decks, and he wanted me to take a look at it and see if there was any way to improve it or make it a little bit better, run more smoothly, something like that. So without further ado, let's go over the deck. Commander is Vazi, Keen Negotiator. It's a 3/3 for 2, a black, a red, and a green, so Jund colors. He has haste and tap. Target opponent creates X treasure tokens, where X is the number of treasure tokens you created this turn. And whenever an opponent casts a spell or activates an ability, if mana from a treasure was spent to cast it or activate it, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, then draw a card. So the deck is about making treasure tokens and then gifting treasure tokens to your opponents in the hopes that they use them to cast their spells and activate abilities, and then you get to draw cards and make creatures bigger. There's a few things that I don't really like about this guy to begin with. Mainly, it requires our opponents to do something for us to get any benefit. And it doesn't actually force them to use those treasure tokens, right? So we just kind of have to hope that they don't care and they want to give us stuff after we gave them stuff. But we'll go over that later. So first, let's take a look at the lands. For the most part, we've got a pretty good assortment of lands that make different colors, from like Spire of Industry and Forbidden Orchard and Command Tower. We got some basics, some dual lands, but the two big ones that really will matter in this deck are going to be Treasure Vault and Mines of Moria. Treasure Vault is an artifact land that can tap for a colorless, or you can pay double X, tap it, and sacrifice it to create X treasure tokens, so it can be a burst of treasure tokens later in the game if we have a ton of extra mana. Or, with Mines of Moria, it comes into play tapped unless we control a legendary creature. It can tap for a red, or you can pay 3 and a red and tap it, exile 3 cards from your graveyard, and create 2 treasure tokens. So just another way to make treasure tokens with a land that we already have in the deck, just in case we don't have some other way in our hand, which, as you'll see, that probably won't be an issue. Now let's go over ramp. Got some pretty basic ramp stuff here with Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, and Felwar Stone. Pretty common to see in most decks. Ignoble Hierarch is nice because we're playing Jund. It's a 1 mana ramp spell. Rampant Growth will get us any basic, and we've got Kodama's Reach and Cultivate. All pretty common, easy to use ramp spells. Honestly, if I were to make a suggestion for this deck, I would cut at least half of these, if not more. Maybe keep like Soul Ring and Ignoble Hierarch to get those early turn bursts of mana, but the rest of them, because we make so many treasure tokens, we already have that ramp, right? So we don't really need more of it. That'd just be my suggestion to maybe improve the deck a little bit and make it run a little smoother, because if we've already got 50 treasure tokens out or whatever, and we draw a Felwar Stone, like, that feels pretty bad. I'm going to call this pile our miscellaneous cards. So the cards that don't really have a home, and there's so few of them that we can't really pile them all up together to make their own distinction. So like for removal, we've got Beast Within and Chaos Warp. Those are the only 2 removal spells in the deck. There's a Hexing Squelcher just for some protection, I'm guessing. Lightning Greaves will give us haste and shroud. Our commander already has haste, so really it's only adding shroud to that, and I guess any other creature that we have in the deck. There are some big fatties that will be nice with Lightning Greaves. Eternal Witness will get us something back out of the graveyard, along with Lich Knight's Conquest. It's a 5-drop sorcery. Sacrifice any number of artifacts, enchantments, and or tokens, and return that many creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. So it's pretty good late game. Like if we've got a bunch of extra treasures that we don't need, we can sacrifice them off and then reanimate our entire graveyard, essentially. And it is only from your graveyard, so we can't hit our opponent's stuff. And then Hoarder's Greed, which is a sorcery for 3 and a black. It says you lose 2 life and draw 2 cards, and then you clash with an opponent. If you win, repeat this process. So you can draw extra cards. At minimum, it's going to be 4 mana for 2 cards and 2 life. So not a super great rate, but it's alright. I've seen worse draw spells. As for this stuff, I mean, Hexing Squelcher is a cool card, but I don't know that it really needs to be in this deck. It's just a 2/2 that makes it so our spells can't be countered, which, I mean, if you're worried about your spells getting countered, it's not a bad card, but for the most part, it doesn't really advance our board state or work. That doesn't synergize with the deck in any way other than just being a protection piece. So from what I'm seeing right now, I would really suggest adding some more removal just to kind of slow your opponents down while you try to do your thing. Next, we're going to go over cards that create treasure tokens. So in this first pile, we've got stuff that creates treasure tokens just for us. So first up, there's a Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer. He's a 2/1 for 1 red. He has a dash for 1 and a red. And whenever he deals combat damage to a player, you make a treasure token and exile the top card of their library. Till end of turn, you may cast that card. So if it's a land, you can't play it, but other than that, you get to swipe a spell from your opponent, hopefully, and it makes a treasure token. Scuzzback Scrounger is a 3/2 for 1 and a red. And at the beginning of your main phase, you may Blight 1, which is putting a -1/-1 counter on a creature you control, specifically. And if you do, you make a treasure token. So it's a reliable way to make a treasure token on each of your upkeeps as long as you have a creature to Blight onto. And then we've got Treasure Map, which is an artifact. You can pay 1, tap it, and scry 1, put a landmark counter on the treasure map. And if there are 3 or more landmark counters on it, you remove those counters and transform treasure map and make 3 colorless treasure artifact tokens. The backside is a land. You can tap it for a colorless, or you can tap it to sacrifice a treasure and draw a card. So a little bit extra card draw, but it also makes 3 treasures. It does take 3 turns to get online to make those treasures, so not the most efficient way to make treasures, but also not terrible. Prosperous Bandit is a 2/2 for 2 and a red. It has Offspring 1, so when you cast it, you may pay an additional 1 mana as you cast it, and if you do, you make a 1/1 copy of this creature, which would be a 1/1 with first strike, and when this creature deals combat damage to a player, you create that many treasure tokens. So the Prosperous Bandit by itself, if it doesn't get blocked, will make 2 treasure tokens, and the Offspring will make 1. Now, with our commander, we could potentially make more treasure tokens with them because we can put +1/+1 counters on them with Vazi's ability. So it's a way to make progressively more and more treasure tokens. We've also got Treasure Chest. It's a 3-drop artifact. You can pay 4, sacrifice Treasure Chest, and roll a d20. On a 1, it's trapped and you lose 3 life, which would suck big time, but just don't roll a 1 and you'll be fine. 2 through 9 is creating 5 treasure tokens. 10 through 19 is you gain 3 life and draw 3 cards. And 20 is search your library for a card. If it's an artifact card, you can put it onto the battlefield. Otherwise, you put that card into your hand and then shuffle. Pretty cool. I mean, 2 through 20, all of those abilities are great. Drawing 3 cards, gaining 3 life, creating 5 treasure tokens. I mean, we almost always want to hit the 2 through 9 to make the treasure tokens because that's kind of what we're about. But all of the other effects, except for 1, obviously, are pretty good for us. Next up, we've got a Goldspan Dragon. It's a 4/4 for 3 and double red, flying in haste. And when it attacks or becomes the target of a spell, you create a treasure token. And it makes it so treasures that we control have tap to sacrifice and make 2 mana of any one color. So basically lets our treasure tokens sack to make double mana. Ancient Copper Dragon is a 6/5 flyer for 4 and double red. And when it deals combat damage to a player, we roll a d20 and make an equal number of treasure tokens. Bootlegger's Stash is an artifact for 5 and a green, and it says lands you control have tap to create a treasure token. So all of our lands tapping to make treasures instead of mana, which equals the same amount of mana, but not the same amount of treasures, right? So if we tap 6 lands for 6 treasures, we still have 6 mana, but Vazi can then make 6 treasure tokens under an opponent's control. Hit the Motherlode. So 4 and triple red, discover 10, and if the discovered card's mana value is less than 10, you create a number of tapped treasure tokens equal to the difference. So more than likely, I don't think there's anything in here that even costs 10, so it's gonna make us treasure tokens no matter what. Old Gnawbone is a 7/7 for 5 and double green. Has flying. And whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you make that many treasure tokens. So it's going to make treasure tokens for each creature that deals combat damage to a player. And it's going to make that many. So it's a 7/7 with flying. So I mean, at minimum, it's going to be making 7 treasure tokens. Next, we've got Cavern Horde Dragon, 7 and double red. It's a 6/6. It costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest number of artifacts an opponent controls. And if you're dishing out a bunch of treasure tokens with Vazi, it's going to be significantly less. Has flying, trample, and haste. And when it deals combat damage to a player, you create a treasure token for each artifact that player controls. And we're already giving artifacts to our opponents, so we're going to make even more treasures. Next, we've got Hell to Pay. That's X and a red. Sorcery, it deals X damage to target creature. Create a number of tapped treasure tokens equal to the amount of excess damage dealt to that creature this way. So we can dump a bunch of extra mana into the X for Hell to Pay, create a shitload of treasure tokens, and then make our opponents create a shitload of treasure tokens. And we've got a Gold Vein Hydra. It's X and a green, has vigilance, trample, and haste. And when it enters the battlefield, with X/1/1 counters on it, and when it dies, you create a number of tapped treasure tokens equal to its power. So kind of the same thing with Hell to Pay. We're going to have a bunch of extra mana for X. We're going to make a Gold Vein Hydra. It's going to be huge. When it dies, which it probably will at some point, we don't really have any sack outlets, but for the most part, like, people are going to see it and want to get rid of it. Hopefully it doesn't get hit with like a path or something like that. We'll make a ton of extra treasure tokens. So these were all cards that create treasure tokens for us on their own by themselves, right? So we don't need any extra cards to really make these cards create treasure tokens. I guess the Gold Vein Hydra, you could make an argument that it needs that. But for the most part, those cards are going to make treasure tokens on their own for us. Next up, these cards all kind of do the same thing as well. They're going to make treasure tokens for us on their own, but they're also going to draw us cards, right? First up, we got Deadly Dispute. It's a 1 and a black instant. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice an artifact or creature. So we do already have to have an artifact or creature out to cast Deadly Dispute, but we're going to be making treasure tokens left and right, so it shouldn't be a problem. We're going to draw 2 cards and create a treasure token for 2 mana. It's pretty good. Next, we've got Black Market Connections. It's 2 and a black. It's an enchantment, and at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, you choose 1 or more. You make a treasure token and lose 1 life, draw a card and lose 2 life, or you can make a 3/2 colorless shapeshifter creature token with changeling and lose 3 life. So for 6 life, we can do all 3 of those things. Typically, we're just going to be making the treasure token and losing a life. We might need to draw a card and lose 2 life, so taking 3 life total to do both of those things. Also not really a bad rate. I'm okay with that. Seize the Spotlight is 2 and a red, sorcery. Each opponent chooses Fame or Fortune. For each player who chooses Fame, you gain control of a creature that player controls until end of turn. Untap those creatures and they gain haste until end of turn. For each player who chose Fortune, you draw a card and you create a treasure token. So it's a way for us to make treasure tokens and most likely draw cards. It's unlikely that people are going to want to give us creatures depending on what they have and what we have, right? So for the most part, this will be drawing us cards and making us treasure tokens, unless our opponents really do have just like a 1/1 token to give us. So again, kind of one of those cards that relies on our opponents to give us things and hopefully do what we want them to do, which I think anybody who's played Commander enough knows that our opponents hardly ever do anything in our best interest. So the next 3 cards are pretty much all identical, so we'll talk about them all at the same time. We've got Unexpected Windfall, Big Score, and Pirate's Pillage. And all of them are 4 mana red cards that say, as an additional cost to cast this spell, discard a card, draw 2 cards, and create 2 treasures. Just card draw on a 4 mana spell that also makes treasure tokens. So it pays for like half the spell on its own, and it feeds into what Vazi wants us to do, which is making treasure tokens and then giving them to our opponents. Next, we've got some cards that make treasure tokens, but they require a little bit of setup first. So first we've got Gala's Greeters. It's a 1/1 for 1 and a green, and it has an ability called Alliance. which is whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you choose one that hasn't been chosen this turn. So in a turn, we can get all 3 of them if we have 3 creatures enter the battlefield. Those modes are putting a +1/+1 counter on Gala Greeters, so this creature specifically. You can create a tapped treasure token, and you can gain 2 life. So every turn, even our opponent's turns, if we're able to make creatures come into play on our opponent's turns, we can get this Gala Greeters effect. Zorn is a 3/2 elemental for 2 and a red. If you would create 1 or more treasure tokens, you instead create those tokens plus an additional treasure token. So when we're making treasure tokens, Zorn will add 1 to the total amount of treasure tokens we're making. So Zorn doesn't actually make treasure tokens on his own, but he does supplement other treasure token creation. Pitiless Plunderers is a 1/4 human pirate for 3 and a black. Whenever another creature you control dies, you create a treasure token. So Pitiless Plunderer doesn't make treasure tokens just by entering or attacking or doing something like that. You have to have a creature that dies, which means you have to have a sack outlet and stuff like that. That is actually not something that I've seen in this deck. I'm pretty sure we don't actually have any sack outlets, so Pitiless Plunderer probably isn't going to be a great card for us, because we're not really playing into that aristocrat style deck. At least not for creatures. There are some stuff for artifacts that does that. Ruthless Technomancer is a 2/4 for 3 and a black, and when it enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice another creature you control. If you do, create a number of treasure tokens equal to that creature's power, and you can pay 2 and a black and sacrifice X artifacts and return target creature with power X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. X cannot be 0. So I know I just said we aren't playing an aristocrat style deck. We're not. This does sacrifice a creature, yes, but it's like one of maybe 2 or 3 cards that can do something like that, and that's not really a good reason to have Pitiless Plunderer in the deck. But it does make treasure tokens, and we have to have another creature to sack to it. Stormkiln Artist is a 2/2 for 3 and a red. He's a dwarf shaman, and he gets +1/+0 for each artifact you control, and he has Magecraft, so whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, you make a treasure token. So he doesn't make any by himself, but every time we try to further our board state by casting an instant or sorcery, he's going to make us an additional treasure token. And if something like Zorn is out, he'll make 2 treasure tokens. And then whatever instant or sorcery we cast that also makes treasure tokens will make additional treasure tokens on top of that. So it'll just keep compounding over and over again. Second Harvest is for each token you control, you make a token that's a copy of that permanent. So it'll let us double the amount of treasure tokens we have, which would be pretty sweet if we have a lot of them. And Spiteful Banditry. It is X and double red. When it enters the battle, it's an enchantment for X and double red. And when it enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to each creature. And whenever 1 or more creatures your opponents control die, you create a treasure token. This ability triggers only once each turn. So it can wipe the board. It will only make 1 treasure token when multiple creatures go to the graveyard. So if we wipe the board and kill off 12 creatures, we're still only making 1 treasure token, because it says whenever 1 or more creatures your opponents control die. So that part kind of sucks, but it does still make us a treasure token and potentially wipe the board. So I guess it's another removal spell, which isn't bad either. I didn't think about that beforehand. So we do have a couple other removal spells. They just make us some treasure tokens, so they didn't kind of end up with the other ones. And next up, we've got stuff that makes treasure tokens for us and for our opponents with Descent into Avernus. It's an enchantment for 2 and a red. At the beginning of our upkeep, we put 2 descent counters on Descent into Avernus. Then each player creates X treasure tokens, and Descent into Avernus deals X damage to each player, where X is the number of descent counters on Descent into Avernus. So on each of our upkeeps, this is going to make 2, then 4, then 6, then 8 treasure tokens for everybody, and deal 2, then 4, then 6, then 8 damage to everybody, including us. So we do have payoffs for our opponents just having treasure tokens to begin with. They don't have to be given through Vazi for Vazi's effect to matter, or for any of the effects that matter for our opponents having artifacts or treasure tokens or whatever it is. And then we've also got Tempting Contract. It's an artifact for 4 mana, and it says at the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent may create a treasure token. For each opponent who does, you create a treasure token. So it lets our opponents choose if they want to create treasure tokens, and if they do, we get more treasure tokens, which we can then give out more treasure tokens to our opponents. So now we've got cards that are payoffs for us having treasure tokens. And some of those cards that are payoffs for having treasure tokens are also cards that create treasure tokens, right? So let's start with those first. We've got Alchemist Talent. It's an enchantment class for 3 and a red. And when it enters, you create 2 tap treasure tokens. You can level it up for 1 and a red, and when you do, it says treasures you control have tap, sacrifice this artifact, add 2 mana of any one color. So kind of like, what's it called? What's the stupid dragon? Goldspan Dragon. It'll give our treasures the ability to tap and sack and add 2 mana of any one color. These do not work on top of each other, so it doesn't make it tap and sack for 4. It just gives it that ability to tap and sacrifice for 2 mana of any one color twice. It's okay to have a redundant effect like that. And then to level it up to level 3, it's 4 and a red, and it says whenever you cast a spell, if mana from a treasure was spent to cast it, this class deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to each opponent. So it creates treasure tokens, it lets our treasure tokens add extra mana, and it's a payoff for using our treasure tokens to cast spells. We've got Reign of Riches. It's an enchantment for 3 and double red. And when it enters the battlefield, you create 2 treasure tokens. And the first spell you cast each turn that mana from a treasure was spent to cast has Cascade. So it benefits us by making us treasure tokens, and it benefits us by using those treasure tokens to cast spells to get us more free spells on top of that. We've got a Generous Plunderer. It's a 2/2 for 1 and a red as Menace, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you may create a treasure token, and when you do, target opponent creates a tapped treasure token. So it makes us a treasure token and one for our opponent. And whenever it attacks, it deals damage to defending player equal to the number of artifacts they control. So it makes us a treasure token, so we can give a treasure token with Vazi, and then attack with the Generous Plunderer, and then it deals damage equal to an opponent, to the defending player equal to the number of artifacts they already control. So if we've given them a shitload of treasures, this one specifically gives them a tap treasure, so they can't sacrifice it in response and not take any damage. So when you attack somebody with Generous Plunderer, the ability will go on the stack to deal damage to the defending player equal to the number of artifacts they control. They could then sacrifice off all of their treasure tokens if they have the ability to do so, and potentially make his trigger deal no damage. Again, it's one of those things that requires your opponent to make a choice, and they're always going to make the choice that benefits them the most, not us. So they might take the damage. If they do, great, but then that means they have something to do with all those treasure tokens. If they don't have anything to do with them, they're going to sack them all off, and it won't matter. There are other cards we have that benefit our opponent benefit from our opponent sacrificing off artifacts or tokens or whatever. So maybe it won't matter with Generous Plunderer, but just a Generous Plunderer and a bunch of artifact treasure tokens doesn't mean that our opponent's going to take a shitload of damage. They have a choice to make. And lastly, we've got Pain Distributor. It's a 3/2 for 2 and a red. It's a Devil's Citizen as Menace, and whenever a player casts their first spell each turn, they create a treasure token. So it'll make treasure tokens for us and for our opponents. And whenever an artifact an opponent controls is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, Pain Distributor deals 1 damage to that player. So this is kind of what I was talking about with Generous Plunderer. The Pain Distributor will make it so even if they sacrifice off all of those treasure tokens in response to the Generous Plunderer's triggered ability, they're still going to take the same amount of damage. But if they don't sacrifice them off before the Generous Plunderer deals that damage, and then on their turn they use those artifacts, they're going to be taking more damage, right? Just a way to like shore up some weaknesses of our opponents just kind of ignoring our treasure tokens or not using them in any way. Generous Plunderer and Pain Distributor together is a great combo. Next up, we've got cards that benefit from us having more treasure tokens and don't care about our opponents having treasure tokens. First, we've got a Teething Wormlet. It's a 1/1 for 1 green. It has Death Touch as long as we control 3 or more artifacts, and whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under our control, we gain 1 life. If this is the first time this ability has resolved this turn, you put a 1/1 counter on Teething Wormlet. So Teething Wormlet will get big eventually. It'll have Death Touch as long as we have 3 or more artifacts, which we more than likely will, and it gains us 1 life for each treasure we create under our control. Does a lot for just 1 green mana for us. Next, we've got Marionette Apprentice. It's a 1/2 for 1 and a black. It has Fabricate 1, so when it enters, you can put a +1/+1 counter on it or make a 1/1 servo creature token. That's an artifact. And it says whenever another creature or artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. So every treasure we use is going to make our opponents lose 1 life. If we have a critical mass of treasures, we can kill all of our opponents with Marionette Apprentice pretty easily. And it can be a 2/3, so it'll be a pretty decent blocker. But for the most part, it's just going to sit there and hopefully not die. Next, we've got a Reckless Fireweaver. It's a 1/3 human artificer for 1 and a red, and it says whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under our control, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So we've got our artifacts doing 1 damage to each opponent when they enter, and our artifacts dealing 1 damage to each opponent when they leave. Both of them together is pretty gross. Next up, we've got Agent of the Iron Throne. It is a legendary enchantment background for 2 and a black, and it says commander creatures you own have, whenever an artifact or creature you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. Again, kind of doubling up on that Marionette Apprentice ability, but that's really going to be how we close out the games, is by using a shitload of treasures and having Agent of the Iron Throne or something like that just drain our opponents. Nadir's Nightblade, also along the same lines. It's a 1/3 Elf Warrior for 2 and a black, and it says whenever a token you control leaves the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So again, when our tokens leave the battlefield, it's going to drain our opponents for 1, and this one will actually gain us a 1 as well. Hedron Detonator is a 2/3 for 2 and a red. It says whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, Hedron Detonator deals 1 damage to each opponent. 1 damage to target opponent. And you can tap it and sacrifice 2 artifacts and exile the top card of your library, and you may play that card this turn. So, not bad. It kind of sucks that it's target opponent instead of all of our opponents, but it's way more fair that way. And being able to tap it and sack off 2 of our artifacts, which will trigger stuff like Nadir's Nightblade and Agent of the Iron Throne. And it lets us impulse draw off the top of our library. Ingenious Artillerist is a 3/1 for 2 and a red, and it says whenever 1 or more artifacts enter the battlefield under your control, Ingenious Artillerist deals that much damage to each opponent. So again, if we make a shitload of treasures, it's going to deal that much damage to each opponent. Pretty good. Mirkwood Bats. Again, kind of along the same lines. It's a 2/3 bat for 3 and a black. It has flying, and whenever you create or sacrifice a token, each opponent loses 1 life. That'll trigger if we create 5 treasure tokens, because it's a token, so it triggers for each token that's created. And then we can sack them all, so this gets them coming and leaving. Best of both worlds. Doubling Season, it's an enchantment for 4 and a green, and it says if an effect would put 1 or more tokens into play under your control, it puts twice that many into play instead. And if an effect would place 1 or more counters on a permanent you control, it places twice that many on that permanent instead. So that kind of works double with Vazi. So Vazi wants to make treasure tokens, but Vazi does say target opponent creates the treasure tokens, and then Doubling Season is if we put treasure tokens into play under our control, so it won't double up the Vazi tokens, but whenever an opponent uses a treasure to cast a spell or use an ability, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature and then draw a card. So we'll get to put 2 +1/+1 counters with Vazi. But we'll be making double tokens from Doubling Season and then make a bunch of extra tokens for our opponents this way. Now, Primal Vigor is a little bit different, but almost the same. It's an enchantment for 4 and a green. It says if 1 or more tokens would be created, twice that many of those tokens are created instead. So this will double the amount of treasure tokens we make, and then when we have our opponents make tokens with Vazi, it'll double it again. And if one or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a creature, twice that many +1/+1 counters are put on that creature instead. So same thing with Vazi. If our opponents use those treasure tokens, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on a creature. This will make it 2. If it's out with the doubling season at the same time, it'll be 4. And we've got Marionette Master, which is a 1/3 for 4 and double black. It has Fabricate 3, so when it enters, you can put 3 +1/+1 counters on it, or create 3 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature tokens. You pretty much always want to put the +1/+1 counters on it, because it says, whenever an artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to Marionette Master's power. So we want its power to be as big as possible, and whenever we use a treasure, it's going to drain a single opponent for 4. So not quite as good as the Marionette Apprentice, in my opinion, because it only hits target opponent, but it does drain them for 4 instead of 1. And we can make it more with Vazi or something like that. Or if there's a doubling season or a Primal Vigor, when it comes into play, it'll be 6 instead of 3 counters, so it'll be 7 damage instead of 4. Stuff like that. It can really get out of hand. And lastly, we have Displaced Dinosaurs. It is a 7/7 dinosaur for 5 and 2 green, and it says, as a historic permanent enters the battlefield under your control, it becomes a 7/7 dinosaur creature in addition to its other types. Historic permanents are artifacts, legendaries, and sagas. So all of our treasure tokens are historic. Every treasure token we make will be a 7/7 dinosaur. They will have summoning sickness, so we can't use them right away as mana, but they are 7/7s, and we will make a lot of them. And lastly, we've got payoffs for anybody having artifacts, right? Not just us. So Disciple of the Vault is a 1/1 for 1 black. It's a human cleric, and it says whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may have target opponent lose 1 life. So whenever we use treasures, whenever our opponents use treasures, it's going to trigger Disciple of the Vault. And it is target opponent losing 1 life, so not all opponents. It's not target players, so they can't like redirect it to us or something like that, but it is target opponent, so it's a little bit slower. We've got Sardian Avenger as a 1/1 for 1 and a red. Has first strike and trample, and whenever Sardian Avenger attacks, it gets +X/+0 till end of turn, where X is the number of artifacts your opponents control, so the number of artifacts controlled by all of our opponents. And whenever an artifact an opponent controls is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, Sardian Avenger deals 1 damage to that player. So it'll punish our opponents for using their artifacts, their treasure tokens that we have given them, in more than one way. It's either going to be huge and have first strike and trample, so it'll be really hard to block, or it'll punish them for sacrificing off their artifacts that we've given them. Either way, it's going to be good. Good for us, at least. Next, we've got a Vengeful Tracker as a 2/2 for 1 and a red. It says whenever an opponent sacrifices an artifact, Vengeful Tracker deals 2 damage to them. So again, punishing them for using the treasure tokens we have given them. Bloodroot Apothecary is a 3/3 Squirrel Druid for 2 and a green, and has Toxic 2, so players that are dealt combat damage by this creature get 2 poison counters, and a player with 10 or more poison counters on them loses the game. And it says when Bloodroot Apothecary enters, you and target opponent each create a treasure token. And whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-creature token, that player gets 2 poison counters. So it'll let our opponents use a grand total of 4 treasures that we've given them, and after that, any treasure they use, they will die, as long as Bloodroot Apothecary is in play. So it's a way for us to give a bunch of treasure tokens to our opponents and kind of force them to not use them, in a way. Yeah. I'm not sure how I feel about Bloodroot Apothecary. It feels good on the surface. It feels like it should be a really good card for this deck, but at the same time, it's making it so they don't use the treasures that we've given them in some way, shape, or form. I don't know. I still think it is probably correct to have it in here, but just a thought. Next, we've got Viridian Revel. It's an enchantment for 1 and double green, and it says whenever an artifact is put into an opponent's graveyard from the battlefield, you may draw a card. This card is fucking awesome. I've never seen it before, and I want it. Again, it's a card that requires our opponents to do something for us, but for the most part, they won't really have a choice. And I mean, if they're planning on using any treasure token to cast anything, for each treasure token they use, we're going to draw a card. If we blow up one of their artifacts or mana rocks or something like that, we're going to draw a card, because it's just artifact put into an opponent's graveyard from the battlefield. Next up, we've got a Mayhem Devil. It's a 3/3 devil for 1, a black and a red, and it says whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, Mayhem Devil deals 1 damage to any target. So each treasure token they use is going to be sacrificed. It's going to trigger Mayhem Devil. Same with us. If we sacrifice any treasure tokens with Mayhem Devil, we can start pinging 1 damage here and there. Mayhem Devil is going to work off of all players, and it can target anything. It doesn't have to be the person that sacrificed the treasure or anything like that. So we can point its 1 damage wherever we want. And lastly, we've got a Fengren Marauder. It's a 5/5 beast for 5 and a green, and it says whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may gain 5 life. So every treasure token we use, every treasure token our opponents use, any artifact that's put into the graveyard from the battlefield on any opponent's board or our board, whatever, we're going to be able to gain 5 life off of that, which is pretty bananas. Alright, cuts. If I were looking at this deck to make cuts, this is probably where I would start. The ramp, like I said earlier, all of the land ramp, Rampant Growth, Kodama's Reach, Cultivate, and even Felwar Stone. I left Arcane Signet and Soul Ring in the deck because and Ignoble Hierarch. Soul Ring and Ignoble Hierarch because they're 1 mana, so they can come down turn 1 and provide benefit for the rest of the game that way. Arcane Signet will make a mana of any color that we need. Felwar Stone won't always do that. And then I cut out the land ramp, I would say, just because we make so many treasure tokens, right? That's the whole point. We're making treasure tokens. I would rather have 4 more cards that make treasure tokens than 4 cards that get me mana, right? Because that's kind of the whole point of the deck, is to make more treasure tokens. Also, I think Hexing Squelcher, while it's a cool card, it doesn't do anything that we care about. It doesn't make treasure tokens. It doesn't matter about tokens beyond the battlefield or anything like that. It's just a protection piece for our stuff not being countered. And if we run into a play group where nobody has counter spells, which that is very possible, especially in my play group, there's not always counter spells at the table, right? So then it's just a 2 mana 2/2 that doesn't do anything. Hoarder's Greed, I think, can be cut for another like 1 mana less pay 2 draw 2 spell, or even like Sign in Blood or Night's Whisper or something like that that costs 2 mana to pay 2 life and draw 2 cards. It doesn't have the clash part of it, but I don't think that really matters, to be honest with you. Yeah, your clash might hit every once in a while and you'll draw 4 cards, maybe even 6, but for the most part, and most likely, it's just going to be lose 2 and draw 2. And notably with clashing, you have to win the clash to repeat the process. So if you lose or you tie, you don't repeat the process. And tying, like if you hit a land and your opponent hits a land, which I bet is going to be the most likely outcome, is that you both hit lands, it's not going to work, right? It doesn't do anything. So it's just a 4 mana lose 2 draw 2. There's way better cards for that. The rest of these will make treasure tokens, but I think they don't do it efficiently enough to have a spot in the deck. Scuzzback Scrounger, it only makes us 1 treasure token a turn. We have to blight onto one of our creatures, which is putting a -1/-1 counter on them. The only way we have to negate that -1/-1 counter is with something like Vazi. And if we have something out like Doubling Season, we're going to have to make 2 -1/-1 counters on a creature, which is going to kind of suck for us. So it's a bit of a non-bow that way. All in all, I just don't think it's good enough, but I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. Treasure Map, it takes 3 turns for it to make us anything, and we have to put mana into it. Late game, it's going to suck shit to have that card on the battlefield and have to pay 1 and scry 1 and put a landmark counter on it and blah, blah, blah. Just taking 3 turns, so we have no way to untap it. either to use it multiple times in a turn. So waiting 3 turns to make 3 treasures and flip it over into a land where we can sack a treasure and draw a card once per turn cycle, I just don't think is very good. There's better ways to make treasure tokens. Seize the Spotlight is one of those cards that makes it so our opponents have to make a choice, and they can choose to give us the cards and treasure tokens, or choose to give us some shit-tastic creature that they have until end of turn. And also, if they don't have any creatures in play, they just choose Fame and we get nothing. Pitiless Plunderer. We have to have another creature die to make a treasure. We are not utilizing aristocrat style stuff hardly at all. There's a few things that might sack off a creature, but for the most part, we're not really going to be feeding into the Pitiless Plunderer. It might work like if we have a bunch of creatures out and one of our opponent's board wipes, it can make a bunch of tokens that way, something like that. But for the most part, it really isn't gonna do that much for us. It's just gonna be a 1/4 for 4, and that is bad. I would also maybe consider replacing Hedron Detonator. It does say when an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, it deals 1 damage to target opponent. It does work for all of the treasure tokens we make, so actually maybe that one's not bad to keep around, and it does some impulse draw. Yeah, I think Hedron Detonator is probably fine. Same with Bloodroot Apothecary. I kind of talked about why I didn't think it was great, because it does stop our opponents from using the treasure tokens, and we kind of want them to use them sometimes. But at the same time, like, I don't know, for what I'm going to consider adding into it, I don't think it's bad to have there. I did talk to my friend, and he wanted me to add in this Weft Stalker Ardent into the deck, and he said to just take out whatever I thought would be best to replace it. So I think Pitiless Plunderer is probably a good one to take out for the Weft Stalker Ardent. And the Weft Stalker Ardent is a 2/3 Drix Artificer for 2 and a red, and it says whenever another creature or artifact you control enters, this creature deals 1 damage to each opponent. So kind of what I wanted the Hedron Detonator to do, this does. But it's going to work better than this Pitiless Plunderer will in this deck for sure. Things that I would consider adding in, ways to make our opponents like be forced to use the artifacts that we give them, right? If you wanted to be a real nasty dickhead, you could run a lot of land destruction. So it would give our opponents no choice but to use the treasures that we give them, because they won't have mana in any other way. I'm sure you can come up with your own land destruction strategies with like Obliterate or Jockle Hops, or there's plenty of stuff. One thing I would also really consider adding into this deck would be more removal, and more card draw for that matter. This deck had about 6 sources of card draw, and not all of them were super reliable. Adding more card draw would really smooth out the playstyle of the deck, I think, and you would be able to run it a lot more consistently with more card draw. And like I said, more removal would also be pretty good. We don't have a ton of creatures. There are some, but maybe a sweeper or 2 would go over pretty good. A Damnation or something like that would work really well in this deck. But let's run a Goldfish or 2 so you can kind of see how it plays. Oh boy, that's not a great hand. We got 2 6-drops, a Deadly Dispute that we can't use, and a Goldfane Hydra that's going to come to play very small. So if it were me, I would probably ship this hand, which I think we're going to do. Oh my god. We still ended up with 2 of the same fucking cards. I actually like this one a little bit better, to be honest with you. I think I would keep this one because we have the Sardian Avenger. We can sack it to the Deadly Dispute. And if we can make a treasure token later, it'll look better too. I don't know. Let's try it. We'll see what happens. Oh, we got another land. I don't hate that. So start by playing a swamp. We'll pass the turn. Go to turn 2. Nightblade. That's not terrible. We're going to tap this Sulphurous Springs for a red to play the Avenger. Turn 3. We've got a command tower. That's not bad. So now we have green mana. I think what I would do here is play the Nightblade. I mean, we could maybe attack with the Avenger if we need to. Not if we need to. If we have an opening to swing with it, right? We can swing with the Avenger. If not, probably just pass the turn. Go to turn 4. Play this Swamp. So we've got 4 mana. I think casting the Hydra, where X is equal to 3, so it has 3 +1/+1 counters on it, is not terrible. I know it's a little slow, but on our next turn, we can use that Goldvein Hydra to make extra treasure tokens for us when we sack it to like Deadly Dispute, something like that. So let's untap. Draw. We did get a Hedron Detonator. That's not terrible, but I think the correct move is to, swing with our 3/3 if we can. If we can't, that's fine. We end our turn. At some point, we can use this Goldvein Hydra to block if we need to. And if it's already going to chump and die, we can Deadly Dispute it. Or, like, on the person to our right's end step, we can Deadly Dispute, sacrificing the Goldvein Hydra. So when the Goldvein Hydra dies, we create a number of tapped treasure tokens equal to its power, which was 3. So we'll make 3 treasure tokens, plus the 1 treasure token we're going to make off of Deadly Dispute, which is going to be 4 treasure tokens. 3 of them will be tapped, 1 of them is untapped. At this point, I don't think that particularly matters. If we do need to use one of those treasure tokens, we can to Chaos Warp something, but I don't think on turn 5 or 4. I think turn 4. I don't think on turn 4 we're going to need that at this point, but we also do get to draw 2 additional cards. Then we'll untap for our turn. We'll draw for our turn. We didn't get another land. That kind of sucks. So we could play the Rain of Riches. If we do, we have to use a treasure token to cast it, which sucks because it will make it so that is the first spell that we've cast this turn with a mana spent from a treasure token. So we won't get Cascade off of it. But we can also cast Vazi. We haven't made any treasure tokens this turn, but that's not bad. We can also play the Ancient Copper Dragon or the Displaced Dinosaurs. Both of them pretty fucking solid creatures. I think what we might want to do is crack 2 treasures, tap out our lands to play this Ancient Copper Dragon. Now we do have to set up for 1 more turn to get those treasure tokens, but I think it'll be fine. So let's try this. Now everybody's going to be on super high alert for us. Opponents, so our Luxury Sweet Blend are untapped because we have 2 or more opponents. We can crank in with the Ancient Copper Dragon. So here's my D20 roll. We'll see what happens here. I got a 6. That's not terrible again, so we're going to make 6 treasure tokens. Then on our second main, we're going to use 5 mana to play Rain of Riches. And when we do, we're going to make 2 more treasure tokens. And then we're going to use 5 of these treasure tokens, going down to 5 total, to cast Vazi. And when we do, we're going to Cascade with the Rain of Riches into Teething Wormlet. This 1 card will get randomized and put on the bottom of our library. And then Teething Wormlet says, as death touches on as we control 3 or more artifacts, which we do, and whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under our control, we gain 1 life. All of our opponents are going to lose 3 life, or 5 life, and we're going to gain 5 life off the Nadir's Nightblade. This turn, we have created 8 treasure tokens, 6 off the Ancient Copper Dragon and 2 off the Rain of Riches. So we can create 8 treasure tokens under an opponent's control, which will help us with Sardian Avenger. If any of our opponents uses those treasures that we just gave them, or treasures that they already had, we can put 1/1 counters on things. So let's say we put 2 1/1 counters on Sardian Avenger, and we'll draw 2 cards. Ooh, gross. That's pretty good. Okay, let's go to our next turn and see what happens. We'll draw. We're gonna play a land, which is gonna be this forest. We did just give an opponent 8 treasure tokens. Let's say they have 4 left over, right? So we have a Cavern Horde Dragon that we can cast for 5 mana. Has Flying, Trample, and Haste, and when it deals combat damage to a player, you create a treasure token for each artifact that player controls, so we can make more treasure tokens that way. So let's cast the Cavern Horde Dragon. So we're going to use all 5 of our treasures, and let's cascade into Felwar Stone. That kind of blows, but that's okay. Now we can also pay 2 for Reckless Fireweaver, which is whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under our control, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. And then we will also cast this Hedron Detonator. We are kind of flooding the board, kind of daring our opponents to board wipe, but that's okay, because this is just a goldfish and we can do that. So now whenever we make a treasure token, Reckless Fireweaver is going to deal 1 damage to each opponent, and the Hedron Detonator is going to deal 1 damage to target opponent. Now we're going to go to combat. We're going to swing with this Ancient Copper Dragon and this Cavern Horde Dragon. The Cavern Horde Dragon will go at the player that has the most artifacts, probably whoever we gave those 8 treasures to. We assumed that they had 4 left over, plus any mana rocks. We can safely say it's at least 5 at this point, right? They might get rid of those treasures. They might not. I mean, we can even bank on them getting rid of them and aim it at somebody who has like 3 mana rocks. So let's say this guy's going to make 3. Then this dude is going to make a D20's worth, which is 8. So that's 11 treasures that we're going to make. 11 treasures. That's 11 damage to each opponent. We're going to gain 11 life. And then this 11 damage that we can distribute out to our opponents in any way we see fit. Then we could crack these 11 treasures, drain our opponents for 11 life. So that's 22 damage to each opponent just off of this turn. Plus the 11 damage we can deal out here. So 25-ish damage to each opponent this turn. Plus whatever we can do next turn. We can give somebody 11 treasures here. And anytime they use them, the Sardian Avenger is going to deal damage. We can even cast this treasure chest by using a treasure token. And then 4 of them going to 6 total to crack it. And then roll a d20. Yeah, we got a 6. So that'll be create 5 treasure tokens. So we'll make 5 more treasure tokens, deal 5 more damage here to each opponent. Then we can crack them here and deal another 5 damage to each opponent. So that's 10 total. So 32 plus another 5 damage off of this guy. Should be roughly another 2 damage to each opponent. So 34 around-ish. About 34 damage we did in one single turn off of creating a bunch of treasure tokens. Pretty cool. All right, yeah, I think that's probably going to be it for the video. I don't think we need to do a second goldfish. That's pretty much how the deck is going to run, right? All right, guys. Well, if you enjoyed this video, let me know. I can do more videos using some of my friends' decks. I still have a ton of decks that I can make videos about and stuff too. But yeah, if you enjoyed this one, let me know. If you have a deck you want me to take a look at, let me know. I can give you some pointers or throw out some ideas for you. And most importantly, if you liked the video, please share it with somebody. Let them know there's a newish channel that puts out videos pretty infrequently that they might enjoy. All right, guys. Well, thanks for checking it out. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll catch you in the next one.